What does it take to build an empire? Is it genius? Luck? Or is it the audacity to make a promise you have absolutely no way of keeping? This is a story about a company that changed the world, but it's also a story about a bluff, a single high-stakes gamble that set the stage for total domination and nearly led to total destruction. This is the story of Microsoft. The year is 1980. The location, Armonk, New York, the headquarters of International Business Machines, IBM. In the world of technology, they weren't just a giant, they were the world, a corporate titan with more power, money, and influence than most governments. And on this day, they were meeting with two kids. Across the table sat 24-year-old Bill Gates and 27-year-old Paul Allen. Their company, Microsoft, was a tiny operation based out of Washington State. They were smart, they were ambitious, but in this room, they were minnows swimming with a great white shark. IBM had a secret project, code-named Project Chess. They were building a personal computer, a machine for the masses, and they needed the single most important piece of software to make it run, an operating system. The IBM executives, formal and serious, laid out their needs. They asked Gates a simple question: can you provide it? Here's the thing, the secret that could have ended Microsoft before it even truly began. They didn't have one. Not a single line of code. They had nothing. This was the moment, the pivot point in history. A normal person would have admitted defeat, thanked them for their time, and walked away. But Bill Gates was not a normal person. He looked the most powerful men in technology square in the eye and said yes. He told them Microsoft could deliver the operating system that would power the future of computing. It was a bluff of such monumental proportions it bordered on insanity. He was selling a product that didn't exist, promising to build the foundation for IBM's new world, all based on nothing. How could two college dropouts from Seattle possibly pull off the biggest bluff in corporate history? To understand that, you have to understand where they came from. You have to go back to a time of clunky teletype machines, late-night coding sessions, and two teenagers who saw the future in a flickering green screen.
Before the billions, before the empire, there was Lakeside, an exclusive private school in Seattle. This is where a shy, brilliant, and fiercely competitive 8th grader named Bill Gates met an older, more worldly 10th grader, Paul Allen. They were an odd pair. Bill was the pragmatist, obsessed with logic and business. Paul was the dreamer, the visionary who could see where the technological moge was heading. But they shared one all-consuming passion, a clunky, refrigerator-sized computer the school had leased. While other kids were at football practice, Bill and Paul were in the computer room, teaching themselves to code, pushing the machine to its limits, and dreaming of what was to come. Their first venture together was pure teenage hustle. They created a small company called Trafo Data. They built a little box with a microprocessor that could read traffic data from rubber hoses laid across roads. Their goal? To sell traffic flow data to city governments. It was a brilliant idea, but it was a spectacular failure. At one presentation, the machine just didn't work. They barely made any money. It's a crucial lesson. Most stories of success start with failure. Trafo Data taught them that a great idea was useless without a product that actually worked, and more importantly, without a market that was ready for it. They were a little too early, but they wouldn't have to wait long. Life pulled them in different directions. Gates to Harvard, Allen to a programming job in Boston. The Trafo Data dream was dead. It seemed their partnership might be too. Until one freezing day in December 1974. Paul Allen was walking through Harvard Square when he saw it, a magazine cover that would change everything. The Altair 8800. It was being hailed as the world's first mini-computer kit, a personal computer. It wasn't for giants like IBM. It was for hobbyists, for people like them. Paul grabbed the magazine and ran. He burst into Gates' dorm room, holding it up. The future they had dreamed of in the lakeside computer room wasn't a dream anymore. It was on the cover of a magazine. It was real. But the Altair had a problem. It was a body without a brain. It had no software, no way for a normal person to tell it what to do. In that dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and dirty laundry, they realized their moment had arrived. The market was finally ready, and this time they wouldn't be too early. They would be first. The company that made the Altair, MITS, was based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Gates and Allen made a cold call. They made another bluff. They told MITS they had created a version of the popular programming language BASIC that could run on the new Altair computer. Once again, they were selling a product that didn't exist. MITS, intrigued, told them to come to Albuquerque and demonstrate it. They had just weeks to create an entire programming language from scratch for a computer they had never even seen. What followed was the stuff of legend, an 8-week frenzy of coding. Paul Allen worked on a simulator for the Altair's chip on Harvard's mainframe, while Bill Gates, pulling all-nighters, wrote the actual code. He famously fell asleep over the keyboard, woke up, and just kept typing. Paul Allen flew to Albuquerque, the finished code on a fragile paper tape. He hadn't slept in days. He walked into MITS headquarters, loaded the tape into the real Altair machine, the first time their code had ever touched the hardware it was designed for. He typed print 2 plus 2. The teletype clattered for a moment and then printed the number, 4. It worked. It actually worked. In that moment, Microsoft was born. Gates dropped out of Harvard, they moved to Albuquerque and began their mission, a computer on every desk and in every home, running Microsoft software. But they quickly ran into a problem. The computer hobbyists who bought the Altair were part of a community that believed software should be free. They were copying and sharing Microsoft's basic interpreter without paying for it. And this is where we see the hustler in Bill Gates truly emerge. He wasn't a hobbyist, he was a businessman. In 1976, he wrote a blistering open letter to hobbyists, accusing them of theft and arguing that paying for software was the only way to encourage professional quality development. It was incredibly controversial. Many in the tight-knit community saw him as a traitor, a sellout. But it was a declaration of intent. Bill Gates was drawing a line in the sand. Software wasn't a hobby, it was a product to be packaged, licensed, and sold. This philosophy, this ruthless focus on the business of software, was what would separate Microsoft from everyone else. And it's the exact mindset he would carry into that fateful meeting with IBM.
So, how did they solve the IBM problem? They faked it till they made it. Immediately after the meeting, Gates and Allen went on a hunt. They found a small Seattle-based company that had built a crude operating system called QDOS, or Quick and Dirty Operating System. It was designed to be a clone of the then-popular CP/M operating system. Microsoft bought it. The price? A mere $50,000. They cleaned it up, rebranded it MS-DOS, Microsoft Disk Operating System, and took it back to IBM. They had fulfilled their promise. But this is where the genius of Bill Gates, the businessman, shines through. IBM, in its arrogance, assumed it was just buying a piece of software for its new PC. They weren't a software company, they were a hardware company. So, in the contract, Bill Gates negotiated a clause that seems almost unbelievable today. He insisted that Microsoft retain the rights to license MS-DOS to other computer manufacturers. IBM, focused on selling their machines, agreed. Think about that. IBM, the Goliath, just allowed David to keep the slingshot and sell it to every other army on the planet. It was one of the greatest business deals in history.
When other companies, like Compaq, started cloning the IBM PC, they all needed an operating system. And who was waiting for them? Microsoft. With every computer sold, IBM or not, a little check went to Bill Gates. It wasn't the hardware that mattered, it was the software. He had created a standard, and he owned it. But a new threat was emerging from Cupertino, California, Apple, and its visionary co-founder, Steve Jobs. Jobs had seen the future at Xerox PARC Labs, a graphical user interface, or GUI, a way of interacting with a computer using pictures and a mouse, not just typing cryptic commands. The Macintosh, released in 1984, was a revolution. It was beautiful, intuitive, and it made Microsoft's MS-DOS look like a dinosaur. Gates knew he was in trouble. He also knew he had to copy it. Microsoft had been working with Apple, developing software for the Mac. This gave them an inside look. What followed was one of the most famous and bitter rivalries in tech history. When Microsoft finally released Windows, its own graphical interface that ran on top of MS-DOS, Steve Jobs was furious. He felt utterly betrayed. In a legendary confrontation, Jobs screamed at Gates, "You're stealing from us!" Gates, ever the pragmatist, calmly replied with one of the most devastating lines in business history. "Well, Steve, I think there's more than one way of looking at it. I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it." The war was on. But while Apple kept its beautiful software locked to its expensive hardware, Microsoft licensed Windows to everyone, the same strategy they used with MS-DOS, now on steroids. The tipping point came in 1995. The launch of Windows 95 wasn't a software release, it was a global cultural event. With a massive marketing budget and the Rolling Stones' "Start Me Up" as its anthem, Windows 95 made computing accessible and exciting for millions. The empire was complete. By the late 90s, over 90% of the world's personal computers ran on Microsoft Windows. Bill Gates was the richest man in the world. They hadn't just put a computer on every desk, they had put their computer on every desk. They had won. Or so they thought. Because when you're on top of the world, everyone is watching, and some people don't like what they see.
Empires attract enemies, and Microsoft had made plenty. By the late 90s, the company wasn't seen as a scrappy underdog anymore. It was viewed as a predatory monopoly. The strategy that made them rich, bundling their products and leveraging their Windows dominance to crush competitors, had caught the attention of the US government. The battleground was the internet. A new company called Netscape was dominating the emerging web browser market with its Navigator browser. Microsoft's response? They developed their own browser, Internet Explorer, and they gave it away for free, bundled directly into Windows. Netscape's business was decimated overnight. To the Department of Justice, this was a clear abuse of monopoly power. In 1998, they filed a landmark antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft, accusing the company of stifling innovation and illegally protecting its Windows monopoly. The trial was a PR disaster for Microsoft, and at the center of it was Bill Gates himself. In his videotaped deposition, the genius who built an empire came across as petulant, forgetful, and contemptuous. He sparred with lawyers, dodged questions, and projected an air of untouchable arrogance. This wasn't the charismatic visionary. This was a king being questioned by commoners, and he didn't like it one bit. The tape was played in court and broadcast on the news. The public perception of Microsoft and of Gates plummeted. In 2000, the verdict came down. Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson found Microsoft guilty of monopolistic practices, and the proposed remedy was shocking: the breakup of Microsoft into two separate companies, one for the operating system and one for its software applications. The empire was about to be forcibly dismantled. It was Judgment Day. The company that had outsmarted IBM, outmaneuvered Apple, and conquered the world was now on its knees, brought down by its own hubris.
Bill Gates stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to his longtime friend and fiery lieutenant, Steve Ballmer. The breakup order was
Eventually overturned on appeal, but the damage was done. The company was wounded, distracted, and fighting a legal war on multiple continents. And while Microsoft was busy in court, the world was changing again. A new wave was coming, and this time, they were about to miss it entirely. With Bill Gates moving into a chief software architect role and Steve Ballmer in the CEO chair, Microsoft entered a new era. An era that many would come to call the lost decade. Ballmer was a force of nature, a brilliant salesman and a fiercely loyal leader. He bled Microsoft blue. But the company culture, once its greatest strength, had become toxic. It was a collection of warring internal factions, more interested in fighting each other for resource than fighting external competitors. And the competition was moving faster than ever. In 2007, Apple unveiled the iPhone. It wasn't just a phone. It was a computer in your pocket, a true paradigm shift. And what was Microsoft's reaction? They laughed. Ballmer famously scoffed at the iPhone's price and lack of a physical keyboard. Microsoft was still thinking in terms of its old empire, PCs and business users. They completely missed the boat on mobile. Their Windows Mobile and later Windows Phone efforts were too little, too late. They were a spectacular, multi-billion-dollar failure. They missed search. Google became the verb for looking things up online, while Microsoft's Bing became a punchline. They missed social media. Facebook connected the world, while Microsoft had nothing. The company that had put a computer on every desk was now an afterthought in the device that was in every pocket. Their stock price stagnated for over a decade. They were seen as a legacy tech company, a dinosaur, big, rich, but ultimately irrelevant. The empire wasn't just wounded, it was slowly dying. It needed a revolution. And that revolution would come from the most unlikely of places, from a quiet, humble engineer who had been inside the company the whole time. In 2014, Steve Ballmer stepped down. The board made a surprising choice for his replacement. Not a flashy outsider, but a 22-year Microsoft veteran named Satya Nadella. Nadella was the anti-Ballmer. He was an engineer, not a salesman. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic, and he knew better than anyone that Microsoft's culture had to change, or the company would die. His first act as CEO was symbolic. He asked his top executives to read a book on nonviolent communication. The message was clear. The era of internal warfare was over. It was time to collaborate. It was time to listen. Nadella laid out a new vision. It wasn't Windows first. It was mobile first, cloud first. He essentially admitted that Microsoft had lost the mobile operating system war. Instead of fighting it, he would pivot. Microsoft would make its best software, Office, Outlook, and more, available on every platform, including Apple's iOS and Google's Android. It was a seismic shift. The old Microsoft would have died before putting its crown jewels on a competitor's device. The new Microsoft would meet customers wherever they were. But the real masterstroke was the cloud. While the world was focused on phones, Nadella poured billions into Microsoft's cloud computing platform, Azure. He was betting the entire future of the company on a new empire. Not an empire of operating systems on desks, but an empire of data centers and services in the cloud, powering the backbone of the modern internet and corporate world. It was a war against a new titan, Amazon Web Services. And this time, Microsoft wasn't the arrogant monopoly. They were the underdog. They embraced open source, the very movement they had once called a cancer. Nadella stood on stage and declared that Microsoft loves Linux. They acquired GitHub, the largest platform for software developers in the world. They bought Minecraft, connecting with a new generation. They launched Microsoft Teams, taking on Slack and becoming essential during the remote work boom. The results have been nothing short of breathtaking. Under Satya Nadella, Microsoft went from a tech dinosaur to one of the most valuable and respected companies on the planet. Its market capitalization soared past $1 trillion, then $2 trillion. The story of Microsoft is a three-act play. The audacious rise built on a legendary bluff and ruthless strategy. The humiliating fall from grace brought on by hubris and a failure to adapt. And finally, an improbable redemption, engineered by a leader who chose empathy over ego and collaboration over conflict. It's a story that proves that no empire is forever, but that even the biggest giants can learn to dance. It proves that the same company can be both the villain and the hero of its own story, and that sometimes the most powerful move a leader can make is to simply change their mind. The tech landscape is a constant battle of titans, each with its own incredible story of origin, ambition, and impact. The story of Microsoft is forever intertwined with its rivals, old and new. So if you found this story compelling, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's next. Because in our next episode, we're tackling the company that came to define the internet age as we know it. A company that started with a simple mission to organize the world's information. A company whose name became a verb. Get ready for the story of Google.